Hey friends, Greg with Money Monk here. So in this week's video, we are going to look at why compound interest fails for most working and middle class people as they're trying to build wealth. The problem with a lot of traditional finance advice around compound interest is that it paints too rosy of a picture of what life really looks like for most people. And the problem with that is that it can blind you to the potential risks and keep you unprepared at key stages in your money journey. So the goal in this video is to challenge the assumptions that go into making compound interest really work for you so that you can really build a sustainable wealth plan that works for you in every stage of your life. And to do this, we're going to compare how wealthy families take advantage of compound interest. And then we're going to compare it to 5 ways that compounding starts to break down for most people. And then we're going to talk about potential solutions to those problems so that you can build a stronger money plan. And the goal with this video is to not depress you or demotivate you from getting on the journey towards building wealth. It's really just to look at the reality of what it takes so that you can be successful over the long term. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the concept of compound interest, I will link a video somewhere up here that really goes through the basics because I'm a huge fan of it. In fact, there's a famous quote that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. And I do think it's amazing, and I understand the math behind it, and you should feel excited about the potential that compound interest can have in your life. But being strategic about how it works and the assumptions that go into making it work will really ensure that you have longer-term success than most people. Okay, so to help understand this, let's first use an example of $10,000 that's compounded over a multi-generational period to help paint the picture of someone who is born into some money versus the life cycle of what most people are born into, which is very little planning for a child. So $10,000 compounded over 40 years and 80 years. And let's assume a 7% interest rate or compound rate for the money. What's happening here is after 10 years, this $10,000 becomes $20,000. And then after 20 years, it doubles again. And here's where things start to accelerate. That becomes 40,000. After 30 years, you double that 40,000. That becomes 80,000. And then here's the really cool thing. In 40 years, you're at 160,000. And actually, the right calculation is it's $179,000. So this is really encouraging because if you are a just everyday person, you can save up $10,000. And if you just don't touch it for 40 years, it's going to become $160,000. So here's an example for multi-generational wealth building. So if you're born into money, let's say you wanted to keep compounding this $10,000 now for 80 years. So let's say you have a lot of forethought and you're 30 years old and you want to invest $10,000 for your child so that in 80 years, by the time you're most likely gone, that child will have money. So actually what's curious about this is, so if you go another 50 years, this becomes 320. And just for speed, this becomes 640, then 1.28 million. Ultimately, and I have a compound interest calculator up here, if you compound this amount of money for 80 years, it ultimately ends up to be $2.242 million from just this $10,000 that you started with 80 years ago. So $10,000 for most people is a lot of money, but if you're in the 1%, $10,000 is really not anything. And so most people aren't born into just $10,000, which is not really typical for wealthy families who are worth millions upon multi-millions of dollars. They're in this compounding cycle. You're born into this, and then you go 40 years, and you're pretty much set for life before you ever even do anything. So I want to contrast that with what most people are born into. So I want to walk through what a life cycle for regular people looks like. And it's not that compound interest is a lie. It is extremely powerful. But I think one of the things to look at critically is the assumption around your ability to continually invest and your ability to not interrupt the compounding cycle. And I don't think that part of the compounding equation is talked about enough. And so I want to kind of walk through this life cycle to bring it to life. So On the left-hand side, you have the contributions that you're going to be putting in over your lifetime. Okay, and then on the bottom here, on your x-axis, you have time. And then I have a different axis over here, which is going to be how your wealth accumulates over time based on the contributions you have. So using a 7% compounding interest rate and a $500 a month assumption, what a compound interest calculator will tell you is that that's going to become $1.2 million after 40 years. Okay, so to kind of map this out, let's take a typical person. So let's say that you're getting into money at the age of 25 down here. Before 25, because of our terrible public school system, you were never really taught anything about building wealth. And so you're just figuring out what to do about money now. And so your monthly contribution is $500 a month. And we'll just put that on this axis. Now, what this would say is if you are 25 now, you're here, and you're compounding to $1.2 million at 65, you would think that by the age of 65, you retire with $1.2 million and you've stayed consistent with your $500 contributions every month. So the problem with this is a few things. So one, in the United States, we have to pay for our college. And so you most likely are not starting at zero at age 25. You most likely are starting like somewhere down here at, let's say, being generous, let's say $50,000. Maybe you have some scholarships. So you're starting at a negative net worth. The other thing to note is that compounding really works in both ways. So there's positive compounding, but then there's the compounding of debt and the interest on debt that works against you. So this $50,000 might actually become over time $80,000 to $100,000 with interest, depending on how quickly you pay it off. And so other things that might happen in this life cycle is, let's say around 30 or 35, you decide that you want kids. So you're going to pay, let's say, around $300,000 per child by the time from ages 0 to 18. So the question is this $500 a month contribution something that you can actually keep up for 40 years? So let's say you have kids, and this $500 a month contribution that you are dedicated to make from the ages of 25 to 65 becomes $250. You have to cut it in half to make room to cover children's expenses. So what happens up here is your $1.2 million, it really gets cut in half. So now you're either faced with either having to work longer, or your curve might look something more like this, because you're starting down here and you have debt. So now the plan for $1.2 million becomes something like $500,000. And that's because, one, you're not starting from a place of wealth where people that have been compounding for generations already are. And because just to get the skills that allow you to get paid, you have to pay for that. So you're starting at a negative place. So other things that happen in life that can impact this compound interest curve are, one, job loss. So it's extremely likely that everybody is going to go through at least one type of layoff throughout their career. There's not any type of really loyalty from employers to employees, and with the acceleration of AI, it's going to make it more and more challenging to hold work for a long period of time. And so challenging this assumption again is that you're able to maintain this level of performance over a long period of time. Now, a positive sign for divorces is divorce is at an all-time low in the United States. So I'm looking at a study here. Basically, for every 1,000 marriages in the last year, only 15% of them ended up in divorce. But if a divorce does happen, that really cuts your net worth in half once again. One thing I want to call out about job loss that I think is extremely underappreciated is that typically layoffs don't happen in a vacuum, okay? So what's happening in the economy when companies start laying off people? Typically, there's a recession. So the stock market is tanking for any number of reasons. And at the same time, people are losing work. So when we think about protecting the power of compounding, if you have an investment portfolio and it's going down because the stock market's tanking, at the same time, you're facing job insecurity, you can get to a point where not only are you having to stop the compounding effect because you don't have work and you're not able to contribute, but worst case is you're actually having to start drawing on your investments to be able to cover you in life, which has an extremely costly effect to the compounding. So being forced to draw on your investments during a downturn, just to do a quick thing here, I didn't think I would do it in this video, but let's talk about geometric averages. Don't click off the video. I'll just go over this briefly. So let's say you have an investment that's worth $10 and it goes down by 20%. So 20% of 10 is 2. So your investment is now worth $8. You might think that to get it back to $10, you need to just go up by 20%. But what happens if you multiply 8 by 20%? So now if your investment is $8 and it goes back up by 20%, so that's actually, it goes back to $9.60. And you might say, well, I went down by 20% to $8. Why am I not going back to 10 when I go up by 20%? So that is the geometric mean or geometric average. It's not the average that you're typically taught in school. And the challenge with this is that you have to go up by a higher percentage than what you go down. And so this is one reason why stock gambling is a risky proposition, because if you go down by 50%, you actually need to go up by much more than 50% to make up for your losses. But the challenge here is not only do you have to go up by a larger amount to get back to where you were, but if you're drawing on this money as you're going down, it just compounds the whole problem. The critical part is understanding that job loss is going to typically happen when your investments are already going down because something's happening in the economy. Okay, so economic downturn, job loss, divorce, paying for children, or other expenses that grow as you get older. We also really didn't hit on getting sick. Another challenge in the United States is because our healthcare is tied to our employer. This puts you at a significant disadvantage. So if you go through some type of job loss or insecurity, you may actually have to draw on these funds to cover healthcare. So that's the other bit that I really want to talk about, is that an unfortunate trend in the United States is that people die broke. So then the other major life event, as you get to this place where you're ready to retire with the nest egg that you've worked your entire life for, where hopefully you have avoided divorce, you've helped your kids, and you've maintained this contribution over time. The other major part of this life cycle is long-term care as you get older. And I'm going to link an article because this is not actually an area in this life cycle that I've researched very much, but this article was really eye-opening. This article is kind of heartbreaking because you read just so many different cases where access to a memory care unit for a dementia patient costs $8,000 a month, and the income that you have won't cover it. And so basically what happens is that this type of wealth that you are attempting to build over time, this just gets gutted in many situations where parents end up dying with zero. They have to sell their house because they don't have care. A lot of Medicaid requirements have certain income requirements. You can read estimates where access to quality care cost people $1 million over 8 years, or the monthly cost alone is in the tens of thousands of dollars, and then access to Medicaid assisted support just doesn't exist. Unfortunately, what happens is that there are not shared safety nets like Medicaid to help cover this. And one thing I neglected to mention in this life cycle that's really important is the other assumption is that you are consistent with your investments. So you put $500 a month and you're not trying to time the market. You're putting that $500 in an investment and actually letting it grow. But I don't have a statistic for you, so this is just a gut feel on working with lots of people with money, is that doesn't really happen. Most people are not consistent. So something bad in the economy happens and they try to withdraw their money from their investments and try to shield themselves from risk. What happens is that often you miss out on the best days in the market because your prediction was wrong. And so while the assumption around a 7% interest rate and compounding on your money works in just theoretical math. Is the 7% actually a reliable rate? If you try to time the market and you have your money out of the market when you're getting emotional, or you overcome your fear and you buy back in when the stock market's doing good and now it's tanking again. So all of those fluctuations that go on with investing, you really have to look yourself in the mirror and say, am I going to consistently invest this $500 in the example for the next 40 years, and I'm never going to miss a month, and I'm always going to invest no matter what's happening in the market. I'm going to stick to my plan. So that's a critical part of all of this. Just looking at the math, it doesn't really capture really the reality of the behavior and emotion that go into even being able to invest to earn that 7%. So what I would dare say is that your compounding has the risk of getting interrupted in like 4 places. And so this idea that you're going to be able to invest consistently over that time might not look like that. So you're starting at 0 and it goes slow, 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 slow. And this is why I talk about mindset so much. Is so for the first 10 years of compounding, it can feel extremely slow. In fact, wealth is a lagging indicator of your behaviors, which I'm going to make another video on. Even in the first 10 years, it's so easy to give up because it doesn't feel like things are moving. Now, there's a lot of videos out there that like say, hey, you hit $100,000 in net worth and everything changes. So while that might be true, let's say it starts going a little bit more exponential, starts going up like this. These life events really do trip most people up. And so then it looks more like this. So you're either flatlining or you're going down because you're having to draw on your investments. And then maybe you are influenced by something happening in the market. So now you're not investing and you're just kind of letting your current investments ride. So it's not ticking up as much. And you end with something much less than the promised 1.8 million. You're actually somewhere down here, let's say at like 500,000. And then really that big one at the end, the long-term care, has the possibility of just bringing you straight to 0. Now, there's nothing wrong with dying with nothing, because that's really what money is there for, is to provide you for things. But going back to my original example of a wealthy family where someone is born into wealth, and this compounding curve, and I'll just do the wealthy family. And actually, I kind of forgot, but a normal compounding curve, you're actually not starting at 0, you're starting somewhere down here. But a wealthy family, if you're born into one, you're like starting up all the way at this $1 million mark, and you're already 40 years into compounding because your family has money, and it's just going like this. So if any of these other life events happen for this person up here, job loss, well, there might be some level of nepotism. So maybe you can find a job in your family's company, or you have connections. So job loss is not as bad. Kids, the cost of a child just doesn't impact this. So even if, and I realize I'm going off the camera here, but even if this person goes down like this, you still have the family's wealth that's building. Either way, it goes back up. So in large part, this is wealth inequality in a life cycle. And this person's experience here is not really having anything to do with them. They don't have long-term care at an elder age. There's no really government programs for this person. There's no school support, so you start really far down. Your health care is not subsidized or covered. And so if you lose your job, you lose that. The safety nets that allow you to build wealth are much lower for this person than they ever will be for this person up here. And it's not that compound interest and the math doesn't work out. It's just that I think in a life cycle and beyond just the basic math, there's a reality for most people that makes it harder than it seems. Okay, so in this third part of the video, hopefully I've not thoroughly depressed you about the prospects of building wealth, which again is not my intent, but what I am trying to do is to kind of combat some of the toxic positivity around these financial influencers that just say, just save a little bit of money and you're going to be successful, I think it ignores a lot of the reality that are commonplace issues in people's lives. And so I want to pair reality with good financial theory. So what's more important is, what do you do through some of these major life events to keep your compound interest curve going? I'm going to talk about a few things. This first one is really the most critical. Is I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the modern financial influencers that have this very kind of I don't know, like just this flowery approach to money that says, just live your life, don't worry about it so much, and if you just save like 10 to 15% of your money, it's all going to work itself out. I'll just tell you from my personal experience, when I was $60,000 in debt, I was bad with credit cards and bad spending habits, and my compound interest was way down here. It wouldn't have worked for me to do a 10 to 15% savings rate to get to where I am today. My target was really a 50 to 60% savings rate that I kept with as I was paid more and more money as I grew skills in my career. Now, I know a 50% savings rate is not a reality for most people. And so I've been a little cautious about kind of sharing what my target rate was. But if you can save more early on, especially before kids, and while you have job security and while money's coming in, I would challenge you to do that. And so if it comes with some level of sacrifice, just think about that more as like a season in your life that you are working towards something much bigger. That's at least kind of the mindset that I had. And so that got into all sorts of minimalism and inspecting my values and how I thought about money and what really meant the most to me. What I found is that I was able to avoid a lot of materialistic traps because I realized that a lot of the stuff I was spending the money on wasn't actually making me happy. So some of the stuff you can do is, as you get raises, you can try to avoid lifestyle creep. So if you get a 3% raise, instead of taking that 3% and spending it and getting into a cycle of spending more, put that 3% towards this amount that you're able to save today. If you have bonuses come in, add those in. The goal is that these contributions early on that you allow to compound over 40 years can become much greater, so that hopefully you're up here somewhere, so that as these different things happen in life, as they do, you're not going down to $0 where you're not able to contribute anything. Hopefully you've been able to save enough to kind of even out the bumpiness in the road. That gets into kids. So there's not much, in my opinion, you can do about the expenses of children. You should spend on your kids. I mean, that's an incredible priority. And in fact, you want to help them with their compounding curve so that they're not starting down here. They're starting somewhere like the wealthy family where you had your $10,000 compounding, or tuition was covered so that they're able to get skills and not start down here. So that's all really admirable and important, but gets back to why it's important to try to challenge yourself to save more, so that if you have to fall down to a lower rate, that still allows you to compound wealth and be successful over time. The other life events that we talked about job loss. So I'll just draw a line through that. So job loss, it's most likely going to happen to everybody at some point in your career. And it gets put into a much broader conversation around earning money. The two comments that I would have based on having a relatively successful career, the two elements that allow you to sustain yourself are the network that you have and the skills that you're building. So if you have a good job right now, it's always a good idea to have your resume up to date, be networking in the industry that you work in, so that if something happens within your company, you have networks that you can easily reach out to that know you and would vouch for you and would help you get another job. Another bit is continuing to grow and build skills that allow you to stay up to date with whatever is happening in the industry that you work in. One idea for that is work with ChatGPT or another AI service and say something like, here's what I do in my career. Can you share different skills that come from this position that would be applicable to other careers? So that way, if you ever had to switch careers, you can kind of start exploring corollary skills that you might have. We talked about divorce as another life cycle event that happens. Unfortunately, I am not a relationship advisor. This is more of a money-focused channel. But I would say that picking the right partner is one of the most critical things you can do, because if you have a good partner that is on the wealth building journey with you, it makes setting higher savings rates possible. So this is something that you can even imagine doing. And hopefully you're in it together. And then more importantly, the divorce thing doesn't happen. Now, as to long-term care planning and the worrying trend about not having anything as long-term care extracts all of the wealth that you've worked to build up, I think that's probably gonna be a longer term video, and it's not an area that I am an expert in. But I would say that between estate planning, long-term care insurance, there are strategies for caring for this so that you do it in a wise way. It's just another part of this life cycle that you need to be aware of as you go through it. And I think what I would close with this video is that if you only pay attention to the basic compound interest math and you ignore the life cycles, you can be in for upset and surprises throughout your journey if you're not thinking holistically and strategically about these life cycles. And unfortunately, for working class people, for middle class people, the safety nets, which I would consider as really the people's assets that you put money into, are not in a place where they are there to sustain your wealth. And so it's really up to you to kind of plan for these different life events as you also plan your compounding journey. So hopefully this video has been helpful. Again, where my heart is helping working and middle class people be successful. So what I don't want to do is demotivate you to the point where you look at all of this and you say, I'm not going to be successful and I'm not going to save and build wealth and kind of go for it. That's not the goal of this video. The goal is to be aware of the different challenges in life that pop up that I think most personal finance that talks about compound interest completely miss, so that you can be more thoughtful and prepared as you're building your wealth strategy. So I would love to hear your comments, both good and bad. I could see where this might be a bit of a controversial video. But hopefully it's not, because I'm not saying compound interest and math are scams, but I do have a problem with overly optimistic and simplistic ideas that don't reflect reality for most everyday people. Are there other life cycle events in life that I didn't include here that you think should be added as you think about your compound interest journey? Are there other ideas or solutions that you have to the different life cycles that we talked about that I didn't address? I would love for you to share those in the comments and to have a conversation around those. And if you are new and you're looking for more information around what the power of compound interest is in a very simple way, I will link my video to compound interest, because it is important that you understand it and you appreciate the power of it, while understanding that things can happen in life cycles that do interrupt that compounding process. So I hope you have a great rest of your week, and would love to hear any questions or comments that you have. Thanks.